I never thought I'd become the sole owner of one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. Life has a strange way of redirecting your path when you least expect it. My name is Ethan Reynolds, and this is the story of how my wife's betrayal became the catalyst for my greatest success. 3 years ago, I was just another executive chef with big dreams. I'd spent 15 years in kitchens across the country, learning from the best, perfecting my craft, and saving every penny. My wife Vanessa and I had a shared vision, to open a high-end restaurant that would redefine culinary excellence in our city. We called it Reynolds & Company, a name that represented our partnership in business and in life. The early days were magical. Vanessa handled the front of house with her natural charm and social grace, while I commanded the kitchen with precision and creativity. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. Our restaurant quickly gained attention, earning rave reviews and attracting an elite clientele. Within 18 months, we had our first Michelin star. The dream was becoming reality. But success comes with sacrifice. I was working 16-hour days, constantly developing new menu items, training staff, and maintaining our exacting standards. Every dish that left my kitchen had to be perfect. Every detail mattered. When I wasn't cooking, I was sourcing rare ingredients, meeting with suppliers, or troubleshooting kitchen equipment. The restaurant became my obsession, my identity. "Ethan, we haven't had dinner together in weeks," Vanessa complained one night as I reviewed the books in our home office. "I feel like I'm living alone in this house." "Just a few more months," I promised, not looking up from the spreadsheets. "Once we have systems in place, I can step back a little." But those months turned into a year, and the distance between us grew. I noticed subtle changes in Vanessa: designer clothes I didn't recognize, new jewelry, late nights attributed to networking events. At the time, I rationalized it all. Of course my wife should look the part of a successful restaurateur. Of course connections were important for our business. I remember the exact moment when the first real doubt crept in. We were hosting a private event for the city's business elite, potential investors who could help us expand. I was busy in the kitchen when I glimpsed Vanessa through the service window. She was laughing with a tall, distinguished man in an impeccable suit. There was something in the way she touched his arm, the way she leaned in close to speak in his ear. A familiarity that seemed out of place. "Who's that with Vanessa?" I asked my sous chef, trying to sound casual. "Marcus Langford," she replied. "Some big-shot investor. Been coming around a lot lately. Always asks for your wife's table." The name meant nothing to me then. I filed it away as another business contact, another potential opportunity for growth. That night, when Vanessa suggested we consider bringing on an investor to expand Reynolds & Company, I agreed it made sense. The restaurant was thriving, but expansion required capital we didn't have. "I've been talking to some interested parties," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "One in particular has extensive experience in restaurant groups. He could take us national, Ethan." "That's great," I said, finally feeling like my sacrifices were paying off. "When can I meet him?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Let me handle the preliminary discussions. You focus on the kitchen, that's your genius. No need to distract you with financial details." I should have seen it then, the way she was compartmentalizing our business, creating spaces where I wasn't welcome. But I trusted her. I trusted us. After all, we were partners, building our dream together. What was hers was mine, and what was mine was hers. As the weeks passed, Vanessa began mentioning Marcus more frequently. Marcus thought we should consider a second location downtown. Marcus had connections with international suppliers who could get us exclusive ingredients. Marcus believed our brand had potential beyond just restaurants, cookbooks, packaged goods, perhaps even a television presence. "He seems to have a lot of opinions about our business," I remarked one evening. "He's been incredibly successful," Vanessa defended. "We'd be foolish not to listen." The changes in our personal life accelerated. Vanessa began attending social events without me, charity galas, business lunches, weekend retreats with potential partners. When she was home, she was constantly on her phone, smiling at texts, stepping away to take calls. Our conversations became superficial, focused on schedules and logistics rather than dreams and feelings. We should have dinner together this weekend, I suggested one morning, missing my wife despite living in the same house. Just us. I'll cook something special. This weekend? She looked flustered. I can't. There's a retreat for restaurant investors in wine country. Marcus thinks it's crucial I attend to represent our interests. I could go with you, I offered. The kitchen can manage for a weekend. No, she said quickly. Someone needs to mind the restaurant. Besides, these events are tedious, all numbers and projections. You'd hate it. I let it go, burying myself deeper in my work. The restaurant was thriving, at least. Our reputation growing. My food earning accolades. If my marriage was suffering, at least my professional dreams were coming true. I told myself this was just a phase, that once we achieved our goals, Vanessa and I would reconnect. Then came the proposal that should have been a warning siren. Vanessa suggested we restructure the business before bringing on investors. We need to create a parent company, she explained. It would own the restaurant and any future ventures. Marcus says it's standard practice for expansion. And who would own this parent company? I asked, finally sensing something amiss. We would, of course, she said, but her eyes didn't meet mine. But we'd need to reapportion some ownership percentages to make room for investment. You'd maintain creative control of the kitchen, naturally. Something in her tone made me uneasy. The way she emphasized my place in the kitchen, as if that was all I should care about. As if the business we built together was suddenly her domain to restructure. I'd like to meet this Marcus before we make any decisions, I said firmly. Of course, she agreed too quickly. I'll set something up. But the meeting never materialized. There was always an excuse. Marcus was traveling, he had a family emergency, scheduling conflicts with my kitchen hours. Meanwhile, Vanessa began bringing me documents to sign, complicated legal papers that she assured me were just preliminary steps toward our expansion. I signed the first few, trusting her summary rather than reading the dense legal text. But as the stakes got higher, so did my suspicion. When she brought me papers for what she called a routine banking matter, I told her I'd review them myself and have our lawyer look them over. Her reaction was immediate and revealing, a flash of panic, quickly masked by irritation. Don't you trust me? She demanded. I've been handling our business affairs for years. It's not about trust, I lied. I just want to understand everything before we move forward. That night, instead of going to bed, I went to the restaurant. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed to find out what. Little did I know that what I would discover in those early morning hours would change the course of my life forever and set me on a path to becoming the sole owner of Reynolds & Company, a path born from betrayal but leading to unexpected freedom. The restaurant was eerily quiet at 2 a.m. I'd sent everyone home hours ago, but sleep eluded me. Something about Vanessa's behavior and this mysterious investor had set off alarm bells I could no longer ignore. The soft glow of emergency lights cast long shadows as I made my way to our shared office. I hadn't come with a plan, just an unsettling feeling that I needed to investigate. Our office was meticulously organized, Vanessa's doing. She had always handled the business side, allowing me to focus on the kitchen. I trusted her completely. Until now. I sat at her desk and opened her laptop. We never kept passwords from each other. I typed in her usual combination, our anniversary date followed by her mother's maiden name, and was granted access. The screen illuminated with a photo of us on opening night, champagne glasses raised in celebration. It felt like looking at strangers. I opened our financial software, something I rarely bothered with beyond checking daily sales. As I navigated through the system, everything appeared in order at first: regular payments to suppliers, staff wages, utilities. Then I noticed a new category, expansion planning. Clicking into it revealed substantial withdrawals over the past 6 months, amounts that made my stomach clench. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. Nearly $500,000 in total, all authorized by Vanessa, all without my knowledge. This can't be right, I muttered. I dug deeper, looking for documentation. There were invoices from a law firm I'd never heard of, consulting fees to a company called Langford Enterprises, and large sums designated simply as strategic investments. Langford. Marcus Langford. The connections were becoming clearer. I searched through her email next, filtering for correspondence with Marcus. Dozens of messages appeared, dating back nearly a year. Their early exchanges were professional, discussing investment opportunities and expansion strategies. But as I read more recent emails, the tone shifted. There were dinner invitations unrelated to business, inside jokes, and vague references to our future plans. One email from 3 weeks ago made my heart sink. From Marcus Langford to Vanessa Reynolds. Subject: Next steps. V. The lawyers have prepared all necessary documents for the restructuring. Once Ethan signs the final papers, we can move forward with our plan. Remember, he maintains creative control of the kitchen that should keep him satisfied while we handle the real business. Can't wait to celebrate properly once this is finalized. The London property is standing by whenever you're ready to scout locations. M. In her sent folder, I found Vanessa's reply. From Vanessa Reynolds to Marcus Langford. Subject: Next steps. Ethan is being unexpectedly difficult about the paperwork. Says he wants to review everything himself. I've never seen him take such interest in the business side before. Don't worry, I'll handle him. He trusts me completely, that's always been his weakness. Give me another week. London sounds perfect. Can't wait to start our new chapter. V. Our new chapter. The words echoed in my mind as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just about business. They were planning something personal as well. I remembered our security system. We had cameras installed throughout the restaurant, including the office and private dining areas. With trembling fingers, I opened the security app and began reviewing recent recordings. Most showed nothing unusual: staff preparing the restaurant, customers dining. I fast-forwarded through days of footage until something caught my eye. 2 weeks ago, after closing time, when I had gone home early with a migraine, Vanessa was in our private dining room with Marcus, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. They were sitting close, champagne glasses between them, reviewing documents spread across the table. Normal enough for a business meeting, except for how they were sitting, his arm across the back of her chair, her body angled toward his. I continued watching, my jaw clenched tight. As they finished reviewing the papers, Vanessa gathered them into a folder. Then, instead of shaking hands, Marcus reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Vanessa leaned into his touch, their eyes locked in a way that made my stomach turn. He whispered something that made her laugh, then pulled her closer. They kissed, not a brief peck but a lingering embrace that spoke of an established relationship. I clicked through more days, finding more late-night meetings in what was supposed to be our restaurant, our shared dream. In one particularly painful clip, they sat at the bar after hours, toasting with the rare Japanese whiskey I had been saving for our anniversary. The evidence was irrefutable. My wife was having an affair with our supposed investor, and together they were planning to push me aside to reduce me to a chef in my own restaurant while they took control of everything we had built. Dawn was breaking by the time I finished my investigation. I copied all the relevant files, emails, and security footage onto a flash drive, then carefully closed everything. The weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest as I drove home. Our house was quiet when I arrived. Vanessa was still asleep, unaware that her deception had crumbled. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her peaceful slumber. How many nights had she lain beside me after spending evenings with him? I retreated to the guest room, unable to lie beside her. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I began planning my next moves. Confronting her immediately would be satisfying but unwise. I needed legal counsel first. By the time Vanessa woke, I had composed myself enough to maintain a facade of normalcy. We exchanged pleasantries over coffee. She mentioned another meeting with investors later that day, and I nodded as if I still believed her. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing something in my expression. You seem distant. Just tired, I lied. Long night in the kitchen. You work too hard, she said, touching my arm with concern that now felt hollow. But it's all going to pay off soon. I'm sure it will, I replied, the double meaning clear only to me. After she left, I contacted a lawyer, not the one Vanessa and I shared, but someone recommended by a fellow chef who had gone through a difficult business dissolution. The meeting with the attorney, Diana Chen, was eye-opening. I showed her the documents I had signed and explained what I had discovered. The good news, Diana said after reviewing everything, is that you haven't signed anything giving away control of the original restaurant. These preliminary documents establish a framework for a parent company, but the critical transfers haven't occurred. And the bad news? I asked. The money that's been moved, nearly $500,000, that's going to be harder to recover, especially if it's been transferred to entities outside your joint business. What about the restaurant itself? Could I lose it? Not if we act quickly, she assured me. You and your wife are equal partners in Reynolds and Company according to your original agreement. She can't sell your share without your signature. A plan began to form in my mind. What if I wanted to become the sole owner? Is there a way to force Vanessa out, given what she's done? Diana considered this. With evidence of financial misconduct and misappropriation of company funds, yes. We could build a case that she's violated her fiduciary duty. But it would get messy, potentially damaging the restaurant's reputation. That was the last thing I wanted. Reynolds and Company was my life's work, my passion. I couldn't let it become collateral damage in a public battle. Let me think about next steps, I told Diana. But please prepare whatever paperwork we might need. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions at the restaurant, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying scenes from the security footage, remembering all the signs I had missed over the past year. That evening, I received a text from Vanessa, great news. Meeting went perfectly. Marcus wants to move forward immediately. Coming to the restaurant now to celebrate. Join us? My heart raced. They were coming here, to my domain. The place where I had discovered their betrayal. This was the moment to confront them, on my territory. I'll be in the office, I replied simply. I dismissed the kitchen staff early, telling them I'd handle final cleanup. Then I went to the office and waited, the flash drive with all my evidence sitting on the desk. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything, for our marriage, for the future of Reynolds and Company, and for the legacy I had worked so hard to build. As I heard the front door open and familiar laughter echo through the empty restaurant, I took a deep breath. The time for denial had passed. The time for truth had come. I heard their voices before I saw them, Vanessa's familiar laugh mixing with a deeper, confident male tone. They appeared in the doorway of the office, momentarily freezing when they saw me sitting behind the desk, hands folded calmly on the surface. Vanessa recovered first, her smile professional but her eyes darting nervously between me and the silver-haired man beside her. Marcus Langford stood tall and assured, extending his hand toward me with practiced charm. Ethan Reynolds, finally we meet. I've heard so much about your culinary genius, he said, his voice smooth as expensive scotch. Your wife has been instrumental in our discussions about taking Reynolds and Company to the next level. I ignored his outstretched hand, instead gesturing to the chairs across from me. Please, both of you, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss about this next level you mention. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, detecting something in my tone. Ethan, Marcus has some exciting news. The investment group is ready to move forward with our expansion plans. They've already secured potential locations in Chicago and San Francisco. Locations that would bear our name but not actually belong to us, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger churning inside me. Isn't that right, Marcus? Or should I say, isn't that what you two have been planning all along? The room fell silent. Marcus glanced at Vanessa, who had gone pale. I connected my flash drive to the computer monitor facing them and played the security footage from 2 weeks prior, the intimate moments they thought no one would ever see. This is what business meetings look like these days? Interesting negotiation tactics, Vanessa, I said as I paused on a frame of them kissing in our private dining room. And these financial transactions, $500,000 moved without my knowledge or consent, that's quite the expansion fund you've been building. Marcus straightened his tie, his composure barely shaken. Ethan, business and pleasure sometimes intersect. But I assure you, the investment opportunity is legitimate and beneficial to all parties. All parties? Or just you two? I turned to Vanessa, whose face had transformed from shock to cold calculation. Were you ever going to tell me that the restructuring would effectively remove me from the business decisions? That I would be reduced to just a chef in my own restaurant while you two controlled everything? Vanessa leaned forward, dropping her pretense of innocence. You never cared about the business side, Ethan. You were always in the kitchen, obsessed with your creations while I handled everything else. This restaurant would be nothing without my management and connections. Connections that apparently include sleeping with investors, I responded, pulling up her emails to Marcus. Planning trips to London together, discussing your new chapter while plotting to push me aside. Did you think I would just sign away everything I've worked for without reading the fine print? You never read the fine print before, she countered, a hint of bitterness in her voice. You trusted me completely. Perhaps too completely. Marcus interjected, his businessman persona fully intact. Reynolds, let's be reasonable. Your talent is in the kitchen, that's undeniable. Our plan still preserves that role for you. You'd be free to focus on what you do best while we handle the growth and expansion. I laughed without humor. My talent built this restaurant. My reputation brings in the customers. My food earns the reviews. And you thought you could just take that from me? We were going to make you rich, Vanessa said, her voice rising. The expansion would have made us all wealthy beyond what this single restaurant could ever provide. I never wanted wealthy beyond, Vanessa. I wanted what we promised each other when we started, a restaurant that meant something, food that mattered, a marriage based on trust and shared dreams. I slid a folder across the desk. These are papers my lawyer prepared today. They detail your financial misconduct and outline two options: either you sign over your share of Reynolds and Company to me, or we go to court where I'll present all of this evidence. Marcus stood abruptly. This is absurd. You have no grounds to. I have every ground, I interrupted. The money trail, the emails, the footage. And I haven't even mentioned the potential tax implications of these unauthorized transfers. How do you think your other investors would react to that information? Vanessa's face hardened as she realized the position she was in. You wouldn't dare risk the restaurant's reputation with a public scandal. Wouldn't I? You clearly don't know me anymore, Vanessa. Maybe you never did. I stood up, suddenly feeling taller than I had in months. You have until tomorrow to decide. Sign the papers, or prepare for a legal battle that will expose everything. Marcus and Vanessa left the restaurant that night shaken but defiant. I knew they would not surrender easily, regardless of the evidence against them. The next morning, instead of the signed papers I had demanded, I received a message from Vanessa's attorney threatening countersuits for harassment and defamation. They were choosing to fight rather than concede, exactly as I had anticipated. What they failed to realize was that I had been preparing for this moment since the day I discovered their betrayal, and my plan extended far beyond simple legal threats. The following week, I initiated the first phase of my carefully orchestrated response. Through my attorney Diana Chen, I contacted the other investors in Marcus's business portfolio, providing carefully selected evidence of his mismanagement of funds and questionable business practices without revealing the personal nature of his relationship with Vanessa. The information was presented as a professional courtesy from one business owner to another, framed as concern rather than accusation. Within days, Marcus found himself facing uncomfortable questions from his partners and investors about his handling of their finances. Your husband is playing a dangerous game, Marcus warned Vanessa during a tense phone call I overheard through my restaurant manager, who remained loyal to me despite Vanessa's attempts to sway the staff. My investors are getting nervous. Tell him to back off. Vanessa approached me at the restaurant that evening, her usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish with these childish tactics? You are threatening the very business you claim to love. I am protecting what is mine, I responded, continuing to prepare for the evening service without looking up from my work. Something you should understand well, considering how fiercely you fought to take it from me. While the legal battle unfolded through our attorneys, I focused on strengthening my position within the restaurant industry. I invited several renowned food critics to exclusive tasting events at Reynolds & Company, showcasing new dishes that highlighted my personal culinary vision. The resulting reviews were glowing, emphasizing that the heart and soul of the restaurant was unquestionably the chef himself. When one prominent critic mentioned hearing rumors about potential ownership changes, I casually mentioned that any dramatic shifts in management would likely result in my departure from the kitchen. The message was clear to anyone who understood the industry: Reynolds & Company without Ethan Reynolds would be nothing but an empty brand. The investors Marcus had lined up suddenly became hesitant, unwilling to finance a restaurant that might lose its star chef. Meanwhile, I cultivated relationships with alternative investors who respected my culinary authority and were interested in expansion plans that kept me firmly at the helm. The pressure on Marcus mounted when one of his largest investors, concerned by the information I had provided, initiated an independent audit of his business dealings. The resulting scrutiny revealed numerous instances of financial impropriety beyond those involving our restaurant. His reputation in the business community began to crumble, and several pending deals were put on indefinite hold. Vanessa, realizing that her future with Marcus was becoming increasingly uncertain, attempted to salvage her position. "Ethan, this has gone too far," she pleaded during an unexpected visit to our home. "We built this restaurant together. Surely we can find a compromise that acknowledges both our contributions." "Your contribution was betrayal," I replied, maintaining my composure despite her obvious distress. "You chose to exchange our partnership for whatever Marcus promised you. Now you must accept the consequences of that decision." The final blow came when I announced a special industry event to celebrate the restaurant's continuing success and to introduce my new vision for its future. The guest list included everyone who mattered in the culinary world, along with several influential business leaders who had expressed interest in my expansion plans. Conspicuously absent from the invitations were Vanessa and Marcus. On the night of the event, as I stood before the assembled guests describing my passion for authentic cuisine and my commitment to maintaining the integrity of Reynolds & Company, Vanessa appeared at the entrance, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and in that moment, she finally understood the completeness of her defeat. The restaurant world was my domain, and she had become an outsider looking in at the life we once shared. The following morning, the papers I had originally demanded were delivered to my attorney's office, signed and notarized. Vanessa had relinquished her claim to Reynolds & Company, accepting a settlement that was far less generous than my initial offer. Marcus, facing investigations into his business practices from multiple directions, withdrew entirely from the restaurant scene, his reputation too damaged to salvage. The transition of Reynolds & Company to my sole ownership wasn't the triumphant victory I had imagined. Instead, it felt hollow, the culmination of a battle I never wanted to fight. The restaurant was mine, completely and irrevocably, but the cost had been steep. I walked through the empty restaurant the day after receiving Vanessa's signed papers, seeing it through new eyes. The space we had designed together now felt haunted by memories. I had won, but the victory left a bitter aftertaste. I gathered the staff to announce the changes, assuring them their positions were secure and that the restaurant would maintain its standards of excellence. When asked about expansion plans, I promised we would grow on our terms and at our pace. Diana Chen, my attorney, confirmed the paperwork was complete. Reynolds & Company was officially mine alone. Marcus was facing investigations from 3 regulatory bodies, his reputation in the restaurant investment world effectively destroyed. Of the $500,000 Vanessa had transferred, we recovered only 30% through the settlement. Diana called the rest the cost of freedom. The following months tested that freedom in unexpected ways. Without Vanessa managing the business operations, I found myself juggling the creative demands of the kitchen with the pragmatic necessities of running a restaurant. Nights stretched into early mornings as I reviewed contracts, adjusted schedules, and scrutinized financial statements that once would have merely required my signature. Our second Michelin star arrived 6 months after Vanessa's departure, a validation that should have felt triumphant but instead highlighted the emptiness of celebrating alone. The restaurant thrived, but I was drowning in dual responsibilities. At my sous chef Myra's insistence, I hired a restaurant management consultant named Grace Palmer. Her assessment was both complimentary and brutally honest. My kitchen ran like clockwork and my food was exceptional, but my business infrastructure was barely functional. She recommended hiring a general manager I could trust implicitly, someone who shared my vision but complemented my weaknesses. Finding such a person became my obsession. I interviewed dozens of candidates, each highly qualified but lacking something essential, a genuine passion for the restaurant's philosophy rather than just its prestige. After Vanessa's betrayal, trust did not come easily. The answer came from an unexpected direction. At a charity dinner, I reconnected with Julian Reeves, a former colleague from my early career in New York. When he mentioned he had recently left his position due to creative differences with new management, something clicked. Julian had always balanced creative talent with practical business sense, a rare chef who understood both the art and commerce of restaurants. 2 weeks later, Julian joined Reynolds & Company as managing partner. Our agreement gave him substantial responsibility for business operations while preserving my control over the kitchen. The arrangement proved transformative. With Julian handling administrative burdens, I rediscovered the joy of creating, developing dishes that reflected a renewed sense of purpose. Under our partnership, Reynolds & Company not only maintained its excellence but found a more sustainable rhythm. We expanded cautiously, opening a small culinary studio adjacent to the restaurant for intimate chef's table experiences and cooking classes. The studio became both a laboratory for experimental dishes and a showcase for local producers. 1 year after Vanessa's departure, I received an unexpected email from her. She was living in London, having followed Marcus there despite his legal troubles. Their relationship had ended badly once his financial resources began to dwindle. She acknowledged making a terrible mistake, throwing away something real for something that proved hollow. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just expressing recognition of what she had lost. My reply was brief but honest: I hope you find what you're looking for, Vanessa. I've found what I needed. That evening, an influential food critic dined with us. 2 years ago, such a visit would have filled me with anxiety. Tonight, I felt only quiet confidence. After her meal, she remarked that while my food had always been technically brilliant, tonight each dish told a story not just of skill, but of purpose. Of a chef who had found his voice. Her comment captured something I had felt but couldn't articulate. In losing everything I thought I wanted, the perfect partnership, the ambitious expansion plans, the calculated climb to the top, I had found something more valuable: authenticity. Later, as I locked up the restaurant, I paused to look at the sign above the door. Reynolds & Company. The name remained unchanged, a reminder of what was lost but also what was saved. The company was no longer Vanessa and me, but this team of dedicated professionals who created something remarkable every night. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately forced me to rebuild not just the business, but myself. I had lost a wife but found a family in my kitchen. I had lost a business partner but gained a true colleague in Julian. I had lost my naive trust in others but discovered a more grounded faith in myself. And somewhere along that difficult path, the food I created had evolved from technically excellent to genuinely soulful. The following morning, I woke with my mind flowing with ideas for new dishes. As I prepared for the day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and paused. The haggard, suspicious man of a year ago had been replaced by someone with clear eyes and determined purpose. I arrived at the restaurant early, stepping into the quiet space that had become the center of my reconstructed life. In the stillness, I felt a sense of completion. The story of betrayal that had threatened to define me had instead become merely a chapter in a longer narrative. As I began preparing for the day ahead, I realized that in the process of saving Reynolds & Company, the restaurant had, in its own way, saved me as well.